Hi everyone, my name is Todd Morrison. I'm the author of this new book, A Profound Mercy, Finding Redemption in the Despair of Our Own Doing. This book is a story of how my life as the child of missionaries became a story of abandonment, survival, betrayal, high-end cocaine dealing, near-death experiences, and ultimately redemption in the most profound and unexpected and incredible way I could have possibly imagined. Experiencing redemption. And I'm telling parts of this story on this YouTube page in the hope that more people like you will hear the story and realize that the redemption that I found is also available to each one of you. If there's hope for somebody like me, there's definitely hope for somebody like you. So please like this story, this video, and consider not only liking but subscribing to this YouTube page so that more people like you can get a chance to hear this story as well. So thanks so much just for being willing to do that. When I was 13 years old and heading into the 8th grade, my family made a life-altering change by moving from Chicago to Tallahassee, Florida. And moving to Tallahassee at that time in my life was a lot like going to a foreign country. Before arriving there, I had no idea that Florida had two cultures: coastal culture, and with rare exception like Orlando, everything else. So coastal culture is all about the Atlantic Ocean to the east and the Gulf to the west, beautiful beaches and palm trees and Disney World, right? Tallahassee fell into the everything else category, even though it was a major college town and the state capital. It's technically Florida, but it felt like extra southern Georgia to me when we arrived there. And we arrived there in August when it was just melting hot and humid and brutal. And on top of that, making a move of that magnitude during adolescence proved to be quite traumatic for me. For example, it was shocking to see that just outside of town there were multi-generational African-American families living in dilapidated shacks with no air conditioning and no indoor plumbing. You know, it was an astonishing sight, something that you may have expected to see in 1883, but not in 1983 when I first encountered it. And having lived in large cities in the U.S. and in Europe, I had no idea that there were still people in America living without indoor plumbing. It was otherworldly, you know. So on my first day as a student at Cobb Middle School, I was caught off guard when one of the neighborhood kids came to the bus stop and declared, "I just want y'all to know that in case any," and he dropped the N-word, "come, I'm sitting in the back of the bus." And I was shocked, not only by what he said, but by the laugh he got at everybody that was at the bus stop that day. You know, it was at that bus stop that I began to realize that black kids and white kids in Tallahassee at that time were not really friends. They didn't really spend time together, which was not what I knew growing up with African-American friends in Chicago. So this is 120 years after slavery was abolished and decades after segregation had ended in the South. Yet the prejudice of this racist kid at the bus stop knew no bounds. He turned his attention to a mom and her two sons that were sitting in their station wagon waiting for the bus. And when he saw that their station wagon had New York license plates, he said, "Look at that, y'all. Yankees. You can't be more Yankee than to be a New York Yankee." Now, this kid wasn't exactly Mensa material, but he, unfortunately, was my first taste of what life would be like for me in Tallahassee. Anthony and Joey Vinti were sitting in that station wagon with their mom, and they were brothers from New York City, twin brothers from New York City, who had recently moved to Florida because their father, Big Joe Vinti, had just retired from a 30-year career with the New York Police Department. And the reason their mom drove them to the bus every day was that Joey had cerebral palsy. And the disease had a crippling effect on Joey's body, on his motor skills, and certainly on his speech. He could walk, and he could even, play baseball for a bit, but he couldn't do it for very long before needing a break, needing a rest. But Joey was a tough kid. He was New York City tough, and he didn't want any pity. He rarely sat out when we were playing sports, and he would get out of his mind, enraged, if he ever felt like we were taking it easy on him because we felt bad for him, or God forbid we felt any pity for him. But he may have been from New York. He may have been a Yankee, but he and his Yankee family had more character, more integrity, and more heart than that racist kid at the bus stop will ever have. Now, I don't remember that racist kid's name, but I'll never forget the Vinti family because they made a huge impression on me during my time as their friend in Tallahassee. So prior to moving to Florida, I had been the first trumpet, second chair in a huge band made up of kids from three large Chicago area schools. So it was the best of the best from these schools. But this did not at all impress Mr. Miller, the Cobb Middle School band teacher, who seemed to judge me almost instantly simply because I was from Chicago, making me a Yankee in his eyes as well, right? First thing he said to me is, "Boy, where are you from?" And I'd never been referred to as boy before by anybody. It didn't feel good. It wasn't meant to be to feel good, right? That was the whole point. So I was feeling intimidated, and I said, "I'm from Chicago." I said, "I was first trumpet, second chair." And he said, "I figured as much. Let me hear if you can play. Let's hear it, son." And so after giving him what I thought was a pretty decent solo performance, he sent me to the third trumpet section, which is band purgatory. And that's the moment that I lost all interest in playing the trumpet. And, I was done. Mr. Miller had patronized me. He had embarrassed me. And that's all it took for me to devote myself to doing whatever I could to disrupt Mr. Miller's fourth period band class every day. And I was unafraid of the consequences. It was, so here I was in third trumpet, and I sat next to a tall blonde-haired kid named Shane. He had the perfect name. And Shane, the first day that I met him, wore this T-shirt with a skull sporting a black cowboy hat with a rebel flag flying in the background. And he pointed to the letters CSA, which were featured prominently on the hat the skull was wearing. And with great enthusiasm, Shane says, "Hey, do you see this? The Confederate States of America. The South is going to rise again." And I remember going home and asking my parents, "Where in the world did you move me to? What is this place?" Right? But Shane and I became friends. So in Mr. Miller's band class, you only got one warning for being disrupted. After that, he'd write your name on the blackboard, indicating that you were on thin ice and would have to write a paper apologizing for your behavior. If you earned a single check next to your name, you were going to do the paper and go to detention. If you got 2 checks by your name, it was all the above, plus a phone call home, and with parental blessing, a swat to the butt with a canoe paddle Mr. Miller kept in his office. So there were literally spankings for 13 and 14-year-old 8th graders. Where was I? So we were just a few weeks into the school year when I committed to hitting Mr. Miller's classroom discipline trifecta. I practically begged Mr. Miller to call my parents that day. A few minutes into the period, I was talking when I should have been playing, and Mr. Miller barely missed a beat when he turned and wrote my name on the chalkboard. And I thought, man, wait a minute, he skipped the verbal warning. And so in protest, I promptly got up, walked to the front of the class, grabbed the eraser, and erased my name from the chalkboard. The class was like instantly abuzz. They're like, "That's that Yankee kid from Chicago. He's fixing to get the paddle, y'all." I was fixing to get something, but I was so angry, I didn't care, right? So I was just angry. I was angry with how Mr. Miller treated me. I was angry that my parents had moved me from everything that I knew of in Chicago to a place where people were as openly racist as they were angry about having lost the Civil War. So Mr. Miller rewrites my name on the chalkboard, and then he puts a check by it, indicating, now I've got detention. Not a problem. I decided then at that point to tap into my creative side and draw a bow-legged cowboy caricature of Mr. Miller wearing a CSA cowboy hat and shooting the middle finger off to the side, with each hand. And my fellow bandmates around me, they loved it because it was quite the likeness. It looked just like him. But their laughter sold me out. "Morrison," Miller yelled, "boy, you best bring whatever's so gosh darn funny down here right this instant." And at that point, I will admit to feeling like maybe I had taken things just a little bit too far with Mr. Miller. So I tried desperately to erase the double birds, but I couldn't quite get the job done before Mr. Miller was standing over me asking, "Is this me, son?" What was I going to say? "Yep, that's you." And he promptly comes back with, "Yes, what?" And I didn't realize he was waiting for me to say, "Yes, sir," like the local kids. I was from Chicago. If you call somebody in Chicago a sir, you're likely to get your butt kicked, right? So he says, "This looks like me shooting the bird." And I said, yeah, I'm like, "Yeah, no," as I'm looking for some plausible alternative. It's you holding pistols, but I tried to erase them because you're not supposed to have pistols in school, guns in school. So the students around just busted out in laughter at my brash disregard for Mr. Miller's authority, but their laughter only served to escalate the situation. Go get your mom on the phone right now, boy. As he pointed to his office where the phone was. He was angry, but he also had this smirk on his face like, I'm going to get the better of you. I'm going to get you with my paddle before this is all over. So I was more than happy to go to his office and call my mother and tell her what a backwater heck of a redneck my band teacher was. And so my mother, though, she was not too pleased to be hearing from me, and for the reason she was hearing from me that day. But fortunately, she had not been feeling the warmth of Southern hospitality herself since we moved to Tallahassee. And as a result, there was less than a snowball's chance she was going to let old Mr. Miller take a swat at her son with his canoe paddle. So she told Mr. Miller that she and my father would deal with the issue later that day. When I arrived home that day, my mother was waiting for me with a bowl of ice cream, which I remember feeling like victory for the Yankee from Chicago. But it didn't, as I look back on that time now, it didn't feel like victory. I struggled immensely in Tallahassee. I missed my friends and the culture that we'd left behind in Chicago. And it was miserable. I was a lonely kid at that time who had a hard time making friends in Florida. I'm an extrovert. But if you met me back then, you would have said, no way, are you an extrovert? You're the most introverted person I've ever met in my life. I connected with people who were like me. I hung out with Anthony and Joey Vinti. They didn't fit in either because they were from New York, Yankees. I hung out with a kid named Greg from Long Beach, California, who found a way to insert the word dude into every sentence he ever said. It was tough. These were my friends, but we weren't close. It was tough for me. I couldn't find my bearings. I was lonely, angry, and probably severely depressed. There were a lot of signs you can read about it in my book. I knew things were falling apart around me. I had a lot of questions about what was going on in my dad's life. I knew my parents' marriage was going to fall apart. And so I just got angry with everybody. And that anger wouldn't change anything. Everything would ultimately fall apart. But my anger only made things worse for me. It caused me to get exiled, abandoned by my parents, as you can read in this book. In fact, if you want to read more, I'll wrap it up here. If you want to know more about how this story started and where it goes from here, you can find my book at toddonamazon.com. You can tune in a couple of days. I'll have another story here for you as well. If you want to get the book in paperback, you can. There's also a Kindle version, and there is also a Audible version that I recorded myself, so which is a lot of fun. So you can listen to it if you want. If you are a leader or are able to book speakers at your organization or your church or your group, even your book club, whether it's live or via Zoom, I'd be happy to come and speak at your event or at your organization. There's a number of different things we can do. I can tell stories. I can make you laugh. I can make you cry, probably, no doubt, actually, with some of these stories. But it's a message, however we take it, it's a message of hope, and it's a message of mercy, and it's a message of redemption, even against some of the greatest odds, which, again, you can learn about in this book. Thanks so much for staying with me. Again, I'd invite you to like this video and subscribe to this YouTube channel if you haven't already. That way more people will get a chance to know about the book and hear these entertaining stories. Thank you so much. See you soon.